I'm Heather Hansma, CEO of Nayak, and Nayak helps salespeople be better real time in the meeting by providing agents insights and coaching around EQ, product knowledge, and salescraft. I'm joined today by Professor Emily Balcetis, who is an associate professor at New York University. She is also well published in over 70 scientific journals and also many journals that we also, for the rest of us, like Newsweek, Time, GQ, Telemundo, Forbes, Cosmopolitan, and 2 TED Talks. She's also written this amazing book, which is available at Amazon. It's a top 50 in experimental psychology, and it is Clearer, Closer, Better, How Successful People See the World. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks, my pleasure.
So, why are Emily and I talking today? So I reached out to Emily because she's been helping us think through how psychology applies to business problems. And she and I were having a conversation about ghosting and about the psychology of it and why it happens and what we can do about it. And why does ghosting matter to us? Because it happens a lot in the real world, but it also happens a lot in business, where 70% of sellers say they've experienced ghosting from a prospect. And at companies, 70% of companies also say that they've had an applicant in the recruiting process who simply, poof, disappeared. So it's a big problem everywhere. And so Emily has taken some time and really gone deep into what is the psychology of ghosting. So let's start there. What does psychology tell us about ghosting?
Sure. I think we can all resonate with the term ghosting just by its name, just disappearing or reappearing or disappearing, and there seems to be a lack of predictability about it. We've had it in texting with friends, and you think you've got a thread going, and all of a sudden you can see the 3 little dots, but nothing pops up and they're gone. And you're left wondering, why? What did I just say something? Why did they leave me? In business, it might show up in a slightly different way, but regardless of the domain, it has a common sort of formula for what it looks like. All of a sudden, there's an unexplained cessation of the communication from a client or a partner or a potential employee, and it leaves the person who's been ghosted without closure or explanation. Now, that's really from a psychological perspective or a motivational science perspective. The challenge is that lack of explanation just sort of grates on us. It's hard to know, what did I do wrong? What should I not do in the future? Or how could I have saved that relationship before it left? That lack of closure is really why it sticks with us so much.
Yeah, and tell us about what are the signs maybe, or what should we sort of perceive about or pay attention to if someone might be experiencing this sort of low psychological commitment then leads them to the behavior of ghosting, because there's probably something going on with them that maybe is perceivable before they just disappear to us.
Sure. So it's rarely random that ghosting happens. And I think, you put a term out there that I think hits the nail on the head. It's a lack of psychological commitment that can give rise to it. An unresolved ambivalence, not sure if I'm in or out as the person who might do the ghosting, coupled with a few aspects of the situation that can lead to the behavior of ghosting. So there might be low anticipated costs of disengaging. It doesn't cost that much to do this thing. And maybe there isn't that much reputational damage, or at least there's the perception that there won't be much reputational damage for having done it. And for those that are on the cusp of ghosting, there's some things that might leak through with how they're paying attention, the language that they're using, the timing, or other aspects of a negotiation or conversation that have to be coordinated. So even though it's this, maybe sort of an abstract experience that we're hoping to prevent, there's still concrete markers that we can look for that might clue us into the possibility that ghosting could happen in the future.
Let's talk about a few of those.
Yeah, sure. So a few of them that we could look for is in those conversations that we're having, there might be a temporal ambiguity. Meaning when we're talking about time, nobody really wants to put a stake in the ground, right? So when timelines remain unbounded, when time commitments aren't ones that people want to stick with or to even sort of promise in advance, What that does is decrease psychological ownership. If I don't have my name associated with a deadline, then that sort of gives me an out. That's where it's becoming ambiguous about what are the next steps, by whom, by when. And people can leverage, whether intentionally or not, that ambiguity to maybe lead to the ghosting behavior. So maybe some phrases that you might have heard or that you might be wary about moving forward is, we'll circle back internally and get back to you. Well, when? And
Yeah.
who's the we in this? The soft deferrals of I'll get back to you, but no date, no time, no means specified by phone call, by an email, by a text, by like how are you going to do that? So that's keeping the ownership low and diffuse. Another sign that we could look for is question asymmetry. So ghost prone clients might be ones that consume information but avoid posing questions that could be evaluative or diagnostic. So they might ask for clarification, but not anything that's necessarily constraining. So how does that work? Can you tell me more about how that works? Rather than something that might be more pointed, like how would that integrate with our systems? That's suggesting more ownership over the idea or the prospects of what collaboration could look like. And it's one that sort of takes the asymmetry away. I'm asking you about me, and I want to see how we work together. In contrast, how does that work is just in a powerful position asking you to share information without asking for integration.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I've heard these things, Emily. I'm nodding because I think it's really
Yeah. And I'm worried about like, have I used them myself? As I say, like these are possibilities. I definitely have heard them too, but like, am I the one that's saying them? I don't know. I'll certainly be more mindful moving forward.
Well, I also think they feel polite. You know what I mean? Like let's say when we're the ghoster doing it, like there's some social constraints sometimes to turning people down, and so like sometimes you use these sort of social conventions is what some of them are, like someday, and those ambiguities.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, ghosting, it sounds like a really hurtful and negative thing, and it sort of is. To leave somebody without closure is really challenging for that person who's been ghosted to receive. And it's not something that people are intentionally trying to do to cause harm. And so it's this slippery slope between figuring out how do I get what I want, which is maybe to dissolve this relationship, but preserve face for that person, or to superficially at least maintain a positive relationship with them by doing these soft, aggressive actions rather than taking what is a challenging and hard step forward, which is to be clear that there is a genuine low probability that this is going to move forward. That's hard to say because you don't want to see somebody's disappointment. People don't want to be the bearer of bad news in most situations. So it feels like a nicer way to do it. But also, if you're feeling like, oh, this is just telling me it's okay to use these kinds of phrases to ghost, that lack of clarity is just a time sink. It's a time sink for the person who doesn't know whether they should or shouldn't move forward with investing resources, but also for you as the one who's thinking that this is a safe out, because it does mean that you've kept the door open enough so that that a vendor or somebody who's trying to engage you is going to keep pinging you, right? You're still going to be paying attention to them. You're still going to be trying to find this soft out. And so it may not necessarily even accomplish the goal that you might be intending it for.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also what we talked about, or you and I have been talking about a little bit, there's also false signals. So like, especially because I do a lot of sales conversations, we're very hopeful people. And we interpret things, hopefully sometimes, and some of those things are actually behaviors of low intent, which are just like, that's fine or whatever. So sometimes we falsely see interest when there's not. And then other times we actually think the client isn't that interested because they ask us a lot of hard questions, and we're taking that as not interested. Tell us a little bit about us as humans and how we might falsely interpret what we're seeing as signs of engagement and disengagement when we might be interpreting those incorrectly.
Sure. For the last 20 years or so, I've been studying wishful thinking.
Yes.
It's the idea that you led your examples with of just hoping that this is going to be a successful negotiation, hoping to land the deal, and that hope can create a bias for us to interpret ambiguous information in a desired way. And that might be motivating to think I still have a chance, because the alternative of just going into every negotiation assuming that it's going to fail, reading every signal as one suggesting that this isn't going to work out, nobody wants to live like that, and it probably makes for more awkward and uncomfortable and maybe even hostile conversations if that is our perspective at the outset. Makes it hard to stay in the job too if you're just assuming every conversation is going to be a fail. So wishful thinking, while it might be a bias and it might be wrong in some instances, might actually be the bias we need to take to give us that motivation to continue on through a difficult job of continuing to engage with clients, cold calling clients, or trying to push through challenging negotiations to land the deal. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but also being calibrated and being accurate in how we're reading signs is also obviously important. On the flip side, there are some people, maybe from past experiences or their general outlook, or from recent base rates, how many times in the past few months have I landed an important negotiation? And maybe if that number is low, it might set them up for certain expectations. Like the last 10 times I've tried, this approach hasn't worked. This product is having a hard time going to market. I'm generally not finding a lot of support for this new idea. That it can establish a base rate or a set of expectations that might also change the way that you're reading a conversation. At the end of the day, conversations between two people or more than two people are really challenging because there is so much rich social information. The words that they're saying, their nonverbals, their facial emotions, their expressions, the way that they respond or they don't respond to what you're putting forward. And yet we read all of that instantaneously. There's lots of room for error in that, or for differences of opinion. Plus, what people are sending with their facial expressions or with the words that they're saying might actually be mixed messages, because maybe they themselves aren't clear on what the answer is that they're entertaining. So all of that is to say, it's really hard, as you know, to read the room correctly. But there are some signs that we might overinterpret with negativity. When people are asking tough questions, that actually might signal decision investment, not annoyance, not disinterest, not trying to tank it and give a rationale or a reason for why they're not going to move forward. Those tough questions might be them, like beta testing the relevance of this or the utility for them, and that it's actually a good sign that they're choosing to spend their time and their energy on probing further and deeper and asking those tough questions. So when we feel like, oh, this is the situation I found myself in, we can just take a pause and try to do some internal reflection on what has happened in the past and what is going to be happening moving forward to see if we've interpreted that right. Is this decision investment and is actually a good sign, or is it a possibility that this actually is a signal that they're not finding that this product or this conversation is the way that they wanted? Price pushback might also be a place for ambiguity. When people are pushing back on the terms of a deal, it might not necessarily be the out for like, well, fine, if you can't meet me where I'm at, then I'm out. It may be that they're leading to that conclusion, but it also might be that, again, they're legitimately interested in trying to seal the deal and find an arrangement that works for every party. So price resistance or price pushback actually is a sign of high involvement and not that disengagement that we're saying is sort of the classic forebearer of ghosting.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. That I think one of the things we've been talking about is, people are giving off signals, but we as humans interpret those signals based on our own experiences
Right.
and the context. And I think that's why we've had some conversations about, like, with Jen and I being a more neutral observer. It just observes the signals and, maybe can be another person to say, no, I think maybe that pushback is good, lean into it versus, just assume they'll ghost you in every single follow up and just give up now,
Right.
So I think you're, that humans are confusing because we're giving off signals that even maybe intent, and that we're smiling and yet we don't like it at all, right? We're causing confusion, and then we as the observer are interpreting these signals through our own lived experience and cultural dimensions that make it hard to totally get things that are not explicitly stated sometimes.
Exactly. And those anecdotes that we're relying on our own past lived experiences are individuated sources of
Yes.
information. It's sort of like case studies. But, we can take a step back and sort of try to see the forest rather than the trees and look to see what, across many forms of negotiation, across lots of people doing those negotiations, what are the signals that more reliably cue ghosting or investment? And you can look at behavioral economics. That's a big field of study.
Yes.
And through thousands of participants, of people engaged in negotiations across many decades worth of studies, they actually found that when people are negotiating or contesting price, that is because they perceive value in the relationship or the product or the negotiation that's worth defending. So that is a signal of engagement rather than of disengagement or disinterest or concern that might lead you to engage in a different way.
That's great. I think it leads to my last question, that let's say we are sort of perceiving correctly. We're on the call, we're sort of perceiving correctly, we're being really good social scientists, and we think what we perceive is correctly low psychological commitment. So what is it that we could do when we're, you and I are together now, we might be perceiving something. What are things that we could do to either get clarity of what's happening or to change from low psychological to higher psychological commitment? What are some tips for people who are experiencing that?
Well, I'm sure we've all heard this phrase and probably said it to ourselves and children or spouses all the time, but you can only control yourself. You cannot control other people. So, there's really, I wouldn't say that there is any, here's a 3-part formula and you are going to change somebody who wants to ghost you into not ghosting you, somebody who is disinterested into deciding, what, I am going to sign this contract with you. But what I think is important is to get clarity. That was one of the possibilities that you put on the table. Because ghosting is this place of uncertainty,
Yep.
psychologically challenging and practically challenging. You don't know how to move forward or how to best invest your own resources, your time, your communications and your relationship building. So if we suspect that there is low disengagement here, I think the best thing to do is actually stress test it so that we can remove that lack of clarity, so that we can gain some certainty on what is the nature of this relationship and does it have a future or not. And that's probably the best thing that we can do. So what can you do to stress test? Is ghosting likely or is it not? Well, it's sort of taking those potential signs, the things that we were cluing into to suggest this might be a relationship that gets ghosted, and test those. So can we force a temporal specificity? I'll get back to you later. Okay, great. Would it be okay if I circled back on Tuesday, or could I expect a call from you on Monday? Is that a reasonable timeline? Of course, you're not going to tell somebody, you do need to call me back on Monday, right? That's not going to work, too aggressive, but you can ask for that kind of commitment of specificity, and that might be an additional signal. If they say, well, I'm not really sure, I need to loop a few more people in, and I'm not sure when we'll be able to get back to you. Okay, that's a sign that they're trying to bit vague and diffuse and that nobody's really owning this decision or this relationship. But if they do give you a specific timeline and agree to maybe a suggestion that you've made, okay, then maybe it's not going to dissolve soon. You can ask for micro commitments. Again, asking for a return phone call on Monday is a question. It's asking for a micro commitment. But is there anything else that you could do? Could I get feedback on the first bullet point of this contract and see what you think? Does this work for your team? And would you mind if we circled back with another conversation 2 days later with some edits to that? Would that be okay? Small commitment, not asking for a signature. You're not asking for anybody to pony up money. You're just asking for more of their time. And if they say yes, well, maybe ghosting isn't going to happen. So, those are a few suggestions. And another reason that ghosting can happen, or another way that people try to have ghosting happen, is by not owning a decision or process. So you can stress test on that. could you walk me through what are the next steps for your decision process here? Are you going to be my point person moving forward? Who's the best person to follow up with so this doesn't fall through the cracks? When you can get more clarity and concreteness to any of these kinds of questions, that actually might be a way to stress test and find out that things are still moving forward, or to find out that they may not.
Yeah, no, I like those, and they're not confrontational. They're not like, are you gonna ghost me? Right.
Right.
They're especially because people's decision making processes are different, and sometimes people just have they don't make decisions in the meeting because they're in process, right? And absorbing the content, and they go back and think about things, and so micro commitments might fit in their mental process better versus I'm ready to sign today, which is what we want, but that's not how it always works.
Right.
Yeah, Emily, these are golden. So since we have you as a social scientist on the call, and you know that the people we talk to are business people, what are other sort of things that we should mention in how the world of social science, if you know, helps people in the world of business? And like just any other tips that we may have for them, as especially your body of research about motivations.
Sure. I mean, social psychologists are not clinical psychologists. I'm not sitting here looking at you, listening to our conversation, and I don't have any insight into what your relationship with your mother was like. That is not the field of psychology. We're behavioral and judgment decision-making scientists who study people. What goes on in people's brains that leads them to think one thing or another, or act in one way or another. So social science, then, social psychologists are studying that, interpersonal relationships and drivers of personal behavior. A big space is in terms of goal setting. So when I think about what are the applications to business, of course, we are setting goals for ourselves, goals for our team, and aspects of that whole process are in our control or are externalized or required buy-in from a group. All of that is really challenging to navigate, right? And there's lots of opportunities for decision points to go one way or to go another way. The way that I approach this is that I can't sit here and have a single conversation with you where I tell you, here are the 3 things that you need to do, and you're going to nail it. You're going to set your goals at the right level of difficulty. You're going to plan for the obstacles. You're going to manage all of those challenges, and you are 100% equipped to move forward, ensuring success. That's just not the way that the world works. But what I do is empower people with an expansive toolkit so that when a strategy they're using maybe isn't working, that readily available is a pivot, is another tool that you can employ because the situation has changed or that first tool isn't working. We can't build a house with just a hammer. We need all the screwdrivers and wrenches and welding tools and all of that at our ready disposal in order to get the job done. And the same is true about meeting our goals when we're trying to work with people. We need to have an expansive toolkit so that when the situation changes, my needs, your needs change, I know that I'm equipped to pivot to a new tool to continue to move forward.
That is great, because I like what you're talking about, that the human to human world is not deterministic. You know, there's a lot of going on, the context and the situation. And I think some of the things when we first started looking at emotional intelligence, people kind of really reduced it to tips and tricks. When someone blinks 3 times, it's showing command. And I think you're really opening it up. This is the human to human dimension of our life. It is very complex, and we need a broad tool set. And also, I think also what comes up a lot related to decision making is it is not all logic. Our humanness comes into it, and it kind of affects and influences what is happening. So the world needs our full knowledge of humanness and whole sets of tools and tool sets for that. So I'm so thankful that you spent time with us today and brought your skills and expertise. And so if you listeners, you want to learn more about what Emily is doing, check out her work and her podcast. If you're interested in how we apply some of these practices and Gen AI to the sales experience, visit us at Nayak.ai. Thank you so much today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.